What's the significance of that music, Danny? Where did that come from? Did you create that yourself?
I would like to say, yeah, I did, but I really didn't. But I just picture people clapping for guests to come on, put your hands together. I was like, yeah,
Yeah,
it works.
it's definitely a vibe.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. But Nick, welcome to the Mansion podcast. Welcome again. Um, I think you may be the most repeated person on my podcast. So you've been on originally in 2017, then you was on a Christmas show with Gemma, and then here we are again, third time a charm.
That's awesome.
Uh,
It's like Graham Norton. He has certain guests back over and over, doesn't he?
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if that's just because he's friends with them or they're actually entertaining. It's probably the same thing here.
yeah, yeah. I like to think of it as both.
We'll
um,
see.
but in 2017, I asked you what your log line was, and you said it was a chap who thinks he's figured out how people learn. Fast forward to 2023, Nick. Does that still stand?
I'd forgotten that. I think my log line now is rights for posterity. I think I've okay. So I think I've realised that the interesting things that I have to say won't won't be comprehensible until I'm after I'm dead. And I think that a big part of my life is just coming to terms with that actually, and it's sort of quite liberating, when you do, because you have to let go of this idea of being recognized or popular or accolades, any of that sort of stuff. And I think that the reason I think that's good is I think it skews your thinking, because I think if you sort of get to the point where you start chasing recognition rather than the more kind of purist dedication to truth and progress, you it limits you.
Okay. And do you think instantly my mind started going to the whole thing of clout chasing on LinkedIn, right? The likes, the things on
Mm.
TikTok, the videos going. And I guess thinking about the generation, instantly going to generations, we might go here. But do you think that thing of that long tail versus short tail reward is a thing we're going to see disappear? I guess, when I see like my niece or whoever put a picture up, it's like all about the likes. And for you, you'll get your likes, but like you say, it might be after you've moved on. Like, is there something around how we play that longer tail game that's missing nowadays, do you think?
The longer tail game. Maybe, yeah. It's an interesting provocation because I think what I'm seeing is people being flattened. So one of the weird things about social media is you can see on TikTok, especially, people exploring lots of different niches, but in every case, it flattens you into a two-dimensional character. So there's a guy called Thor. I think his name's Thor, and all he does is he chops wood. Have you seen him? He's typically he's wearing braces, and he comes on with some hulking great log and then an axe, and he chops it up. He's got millions of hits, millions of followers. Now, I'm guessing there's a lot more to the bloke than that. But what happens, you see, is that social media picks that up, that goes viral. That's all he does. That's all he's known for. Tube Girl, absolutely the same. Tube Girl, I'm sure she did other things. Sure, she's got lots of thoughts on different things. But now, and it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because now he's flattened into this two-dimensional character. All he does, oh, you're the guy who chops wood. So I think that
Mm.
social media tends to caricature people. It says, look, play around, be this Danny, that Danny, that Danny. Oh, this Danny is the popular Danny. That's the Danny you're going to be for the rest of your life. That's all anybody's interested in. And you can go with it and you'll be successful and you'll get the success that goes with it. But the price is got to be flat, two dimensional. So, yeah, I think that in previous decades, centuries, perhaps people had it sounds a bit glib, but a bit more depth to them because
Mm.
there weren't those kind of forces at play. Maybe.
Mm. So, so I guess there's probably two things which I want to needle in on there then. So I guess, there's the version what people want you to be, and there's a version of who you want to be. And I guess it kind of gets me thinking about Carl Jung and stuff, and the mask and stuff, which we'll needle into, I guess, a little bit later on. But if I think about the Nick who I very first come across many, many years ago, like it was Nick, resources, not courses. And I guess has that forced you to be more flat because of what people want to see you as?
Philosophically, this is super interesting. Other people flatten you, basically, And I began to realize that this was such a powerful phenomenon in people's lives. So Einstein is the guy on a t-shirt with his tongue out to Z equals MC squared, right?
Hmm.
And that's how culture and history sort of and other people flatten you. You can take your mask off, to kind of Carl Jung's point, but people will still see the version of you, not necessarily that they want to see, but the version of you that they're able to see. And you have to be able to play with that. So I talk about this quite a lot at conferences. So resources, not courses, or courses to resources, that was something I began to feel was flattening my life. A whole organization, some of whom shifted their strategy around that phrase, and that phrase achieved significance largely because it rhymes and it was simple. 3 words that it rhymes. And I thought, wow, that's weird. You can shift the whole world just because something's catchy. And then the other thing I did was I did the banana thing. So I was trying to point out to people at a learning conference decades ago that really it's emotional significance that drives all learning, not some learning. It's not a part of learning, it is the whole thing. And I said, look, I can burn something into your memory using this effect. And as you know, I sellotaped bananas under people's chairs. I got them all up on stage. I gave them aprons, said, banana munching team. And it vastly exceeded my expectations, because not only did people come up to me years later and say, I remember you from that, there was like a huge double page spread in the magazine for this event that I hadn't asked for, because it was the most exciting thing that had happened. And years later, I visited their website. I won't mention the organization, and there was me with an apron with bananas. It was like years later, and it was like, holy crap! You're telling me this is the most exciting thing that's happened in the industry for decades, and I was just trying to create a memorable event. But then there was a problem, because people started knowing me as Banana Man. It's like, oh, you're the guy with the bananas, right? So, so I started throwing marshmallows instead. So now I regularly throw marshmallows, and I'm Marshmallow Man. But look, this is kind of my point, which is whichever way you twist and turn, you can't reveal yourself beyond the limits of people's perception. If there is any part of you that exists beyond that limit of people's perception, it's invisible, whatever you do.
Mm. Banana man. I love it. I love it. It kind of gets me thinking about the whole mask thing, though, right? Like, you've got, I think, and I don't know this is more your forte than mine, really, Nick. I'm high touch on this, but I jumped into a lot of kind of Carl Jung's work when I was looking at actually how we do sense making,
Yeah.
how we do discovering, how we identify people's behaviors, patterns, and it was funny. I did this, and I used this analogy of someone at a dentist, right? Like if you ask Danny right now, I'm at home, and you ask me about a dentist, I'm confident. Yeah, the dentist is fine. You ask me about Danny as I'm going to the dentist, my mask is somewhat different. And then you ask me when I'm in the dentist chair, and then I'm somewhat different again. And it kind of got me thinking around how we observe someone's problem is often only one lens, that problem in work. And I think this is the reason why immersion is really important, that you see them before work and after work. But I guess when I think about when we do this discovery in work and we do this kind of understanding the person behind the problem and a challenge, I see a lot of time people don't want to do that full version. They don't want to capture that full 360 of a person. They just want this one snapshot. And for me, they miss out a lot more around what makes that person up. Why? Why is that? Like, why do you think organizations often don't want to value the full 360? Yet many companies are people centered and human centered and whatever else.
Yeah, I think because the company's built on a kind of a factory model where you play a role and you're visible to the extent, so it's like a masks in a play, so you adopt that persona and you play that role. And there's pros and cons to that, because I think that you are the, let's say you might be the compliance officer, or you might be head of ethics or whatever, and you are flattened onto your role description. And what happens is that a lot of your interactions with people at work are scripted along those lines. Hi, what do you do? I'm head of ethics and compliance. Hi, I'm head of this. What are the objectives for this meeting? How do these align with our strategy? So I think that sort of happened in pursuit of efficiency. The interesting thing about it, as you know, and as I guess you're hinting at, is it doesn't create belonging, because belonging only really happens when people reveal themselves as their authentic selves. So what happens is people go out for drinks after work, and they may say, I worked with you for years, but I didn't really feel like I got to know you. And what's happened? What's the magic there? Well, the magic is those constraints of interaction have been removed. So I taught psychology for many years. No student ever stood up and brushed their teeth or even just sat down brushing their teeth. There's nothing stopping them doing that. It's just that it's one of those norms for behavior, and there's norms for behavior in the workplace. And unless somebody like you and I deliberately disrupts them, which is the magic of experience design, we can say, now this weird thing is going to happen. What are you going to do? The easiest thing that I do is Manual of Me, which is a format where everybody completes this, you know, a flip chart which says, what I'm best at, what I'm most proud of, what are my key values, things I hate doing, what I dream of, all this kind of stuff. And then everybody talks and they're like, wow, that's amazing. But you see, there's no format for people to do that in everyday work. You could work 30 years in a company and nobody ever asks you to do that. So I think that's your answer. It's that we've created formats which have no norms for that kind of natural, authentic interaction.
Nice. I love that. I love a manual, maybe use a manual or whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
but I just think it's. I designed a email course. Of course, I did, because why not? Just to try it out, and each day they're going to get a kind of a culture craft, a culture hack to try.
yeah.
And the user manual is a great one. I'm like, every time you go to a new meeting or you meet someone, send it in advance.
Mm,
Someone new coming in, send it. Get them to fill one in so that when they join a team.
mm,
That's, I think, one of my favorite things to do. But the other one is what I do is called the fuck up book. And what I make every team is to write their first massive cock up, what they've done.
mm,
And the goal is that you share on when you've kind of joined, when you've got someone coming into the business, you share it in advance about, this is a team, and here's
mhm.
all the times when we fucked up, and here's
Yeah.
the lessons we've learned. And I just think it's simple things like that what I'm missing yet,
Mm,
but it's a risk thing, right? It's a thing around saving face. Like, I still think a lot of the time when we go into see leaders, we want to keep this mask on of, I am
mm,
a leader and I will never mess up. And
yeah.
it goes back to your point, that belonging. I'd rather have a leader who is authentic and kind of says, you know what, I'm not perfect. I have no idea what you're asking from me right now.
Mm,
But yeah, we don't value it. And I think them who do either get pushed outside because they don't conform,
yeah.
or they don't burn out, but they end up becoming a bit resentful, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
I did a project actually with Bridge and Nick Welch, where we interviewed leaders at a big pharma, and the questions were all about their big mistakes. And it was interesting, as you say, some of them, the ones who were confident in themselves, had a sense of who they were, would say, "Oh, blimey! I mean, where do you want me to start? I can start with today if you like, and laugh and tell us about mistakes." And the ones who, as you say, were putting on a front were very uneasy with that question. And you could see what was going through their head, which was they were thinking this is some sort of catch you out type question. And they were struggling to think of a mistake that they could admit to, which somehow enhanced their reputation.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think you're right. So it stems back to kind of confidence, people confidence that they have in themselves and psychological safety. And that in an organization which is heavily conforming, and you notice it because everybody's dressing the same and talking the same and using the same
Mhm.
jargon, people can't emerge as themselves. And so they won't have that confidence to admit to their kind of mistakes. And yeah, it makes it a bad organization. We know that.
It's fascinating. You got me thinking about a past client, and they got me into be innovative and stretch our thinking. And we was talking about it just before we hit record, and I want to bring it back. Um, and it was like, come in and stretch our thinking and show us how we can design better things and do things and be more human centric. And I used the analogy of when I was designing. I was looking at leadership, and it was like, right, who has this problem, and who outside of this world has this problem? And it was around psychological safety. It was around how do we create it really quick. And the argument was, I could go and ask many managers in that business how they do it, but the chances are I'm probably going to get the same answer because they've all one way or another, often over time, conformed. Maybe not all, but many. But then I also identified how the army do it. So I identified this layer of expertise outside. So it was army, there was AA meetings, there was all these different ones, and I shared at this conference. And maybe it was bad on my end. It was the top 100 leaders.
Mm,
And I shared with him that actually the biggest insight I got was when I interviewed someone who runs adult sex parties.
yeah,
And it was like how they create psychological safety really quickly. And it was like that one bit of insight allowed me to create something much richer.
yeah.
And it was funny. After the conference, I got some feedback because I used the word sex. And
Mm.
I'm just like, you want to be stretching, you want to be stretched to kind of come up with some ideas. But then when I do that, it doesn't, you don't like it. And I just think there's something around that conformity, right? There's something around how people say they want something versus how they do. Have you kind of hit that in the past? Is it something you've hit before, or have you kind of just been looking, had awesome clients who have just been open to it?
I think you only know that you're doing something interesting when people are getting uncomfortable. Um, I don't think that's a kind of a glib, offhand kind of statement. Let me sort of explain. I think there's a book by Dan and Chip Heath called "Moments That Matter" that makes a kind of a similar point, which is that organisations exist within these sorts of parameters of normality, and actually anything that's going to transform people or shake people up is going to make senior stakeholders nervous because they got into those roles by being risk averse. That's pretty much the job, is to stop anything out of the ordinary happening. And can you see how that works against effective training? Because it's like, well, the thing that they're going to green light is the thing that looks like the absolutely conventional training program where people sit in rows and listen to something and there's PowerPoint slides and a facilitator talks. As soon as you try to push it into being a piece of experience which is going to put people in a place of uncertainty or is going to be something different, and creating those, it's not gratuitous. You need to do that because people are defined.
Mm,
So here's a question: have you ever been in a fight?
many a times, many a
Many
times.
times, like a proper kind of punch up fist fight.
Yeah,
Right. So you know whether you're the kind of person who stands their ground or runs, right?
yeah.
But if you've never actually been in a fist fight, then you might like to think that you're not a coward. But if you find yourself in that situation, you might discover that you're one of the people who runs. And now that's redefined you. It's redefined, that moment has redefined your whole character, your nature, and you might grapple with that for years, right? So
Mm,
part of what we do is we create these novel situations so that people can be redefined. And you might do that in oil and gas by creating a fire situation where people think they know what they're going to do and then they discover that they panic, right?
mm,
And So we did that as an example. We um, staged a fight. We were doing some training for leaders for a big aircraft manufacturer. And one of the things we'd identified in the analysis is that their leaders are very bad at handling confrontation. They couldn't identify it, they couldn't tackle it. So we had the two actors pretend to be facilitators. And at the opening of the session, they basically started arguing and it escalated until it was a fight. And then everyone was horrified. And, we were able to stop the action and say, right, let's talk about that. When did you notice that something was going wrong? What told you there was conflict? When did somebody cross the line? When should you have stepped in? How would you have stepped in? What would you have said? All of those sorts of questions. And we were able to kind of replay it. But the point of that example is all the way back to your point is we really had to fight to do that because, as you can imagine, every single stakeholder said, "Ooh, I don't know,
mm.
don't think we should do that." So yeah, don't be gratuitously provocative. Don't just sort of throw like the Steve Aoki. Do you know Steve Aoki? Do you know what he does? This cake thing, right?
Yeah.
So I loved that. So he just brings a massive cake on stage at the beginning of his sets and wallops it into the audience. I've dreamed of doing that at a learning conference for so long, but of course, important people in suits don't want to be picking icing out of their ties. So I've never done it, but yeah, so gratuitous provocation, don't do that. But where it's going to help people define themselves, I think that's a very powerful thing to do.
But you kind of got me thinking there though. So, we've both done conference talks and whatever else, and you're throwing marshmallows and bananas on the seats and tattoos and all the good stuff what you've done. And the most recent one which I did was with UEFA, which was the smell bags. Um, And it's funny, I look at that audience, and that audience is the people stakeholders. It's your stakeholders in internal businesses, and they come to see us be provocative, and it's maybe not provocative, but it's just different. It's something, ooh, and in that moment, they'd love it. But there's something around when they get on that train home, when they get on that car home, that in that moment of inspiration over time slowly fades away. And by the time the next day goes in and we go into the office, it's like
Mm.
there's a confinement around, okay, that was something different and this is work. And
Yeah.
I think, we hear a lot on LinkedIn or wherever around, be a family here, you can be yourself and you can be the full you. And then the argument is the undertone of that is, but only if you conform, only if you be like us. Have you seen any, I guess, any businesses, organizations that really own that message, like you can be the full you and actually breathe it? They roll the sleeves up and they own it. Or is it a lot of it just lip service, I guess?
So I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about, and I think it happens on a personal level, right? We read a book that says you should do this, you should do that. Cold water immersion thing is the next thing. I've seen loads of people saying this is the thing you should do, or yoga. And you might try it for a couple of days while you're on holiday, and then you go back to going out for drinks, on a Friday
Mm,
and a Saturday, or whatever. And I think people do revert because I think pushing yourself out of the comfort zone, challenging yourself is the central challenge. And that's the same with businesses, is that growth and development within a business doesn't come because you send people on courses. I mean, if we don't realize that by now, we're just idiots. It comes when you get people to do something different. So I'll give you
mm,
an example. At Deloitte, we had a senior partner, and I said, what was the turning point in your career? And she said, well, it was when I was quite junior and my boss asked me to lead a meeting. So it's a small thing, right? Lead a meeting. But she did it for the first time. That was hugely impactful. You asked, are any organisations doing that well? The BBC used to do it quite well. They had like a swap shop for secondments. So this was way, way back. And there was like an internal notice board where somebody would say, we need a runner for EastEnders for 2 weeks. And the beauty of it is you could apply for it, get it. Your boss didn't need to know that you were applying, get it. You could get it and you could say to your boss, I've got this thing to be a runner on EastEnders for 2 weeks. And the boss would say, great, good for you, off you go. See you in 2 weeks. There were no questions asked. You just completely fluid. But that links back to talent management. That's what stops growth happening in most organizations. That's why people leave and go somewhere else, because it's not easy to move around and try different things and, you know, job swaps and all of that, because leaders like to have people locked into roles. Same with
mm.
the masks question. You are your role.
Yeah. It's funny. I was working with a large, and this says vacuum company. Um, and there was one of the ideas what came about was this whole internal gig economy kind of thing. And it was funny. The first thing they wanted to do is put confinements around it and put red tape around it and put policy around it. And when you needled in it was just so that you could manage performance. You've got them doing this role over here, which is role X. But as soon as that person wanted to stretch and go outside the back box, it was like, but how are we going to manage the performance? How are we going to track it? And it's like all these questions. And then the simplest question is, but what happens if you don't? Like, what happens if you don't track it? What happens if you just allow them to do that for a set time and just enjoy it as an experience?
Hmm.
But again, it's that controller, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dialogue.
It
But
is.
there's I've just remembered we've got straight into it here, and for my guests who don't know, Nick is big on experience design, as you've probably heard. Um, but Nick also has a podcast which he hasn't really shared about, and I'll leave it up to Nick if he
I
wants
don't
to
have it
share.
anymore. I experimented. Let me just say something about that before you dive in, because I know you're itching to go with it. It's like, I think I've learned the value of experimentation. And what I mean by that is you've got to push yourself. When new technology comes along, have a go at it. So I've had a go at, what have I had a go at? I had a go at push it. I wasn't on MySpace, obviously on Facebook. Had a go at Twitter. Um, that got reasonable following on that. Had a go at Instagram, completely failed on that. Um, what else did I have a go at? Podcasting, as you say, I had a go. I realised it wasn't for me, and now I'm having a go on TikTok. So I just like to try these things. But yeah, so I had a podcast. I quite enjoyed it. It was quite good, but I wasn't passionate enough about it to keep it going.
Yeah, it's podcasting is an interesting one. But before I get into podcasting, tell me about your experience with TikTok. Like, how have you found that?
Yeah, really interesting. So people say TikTok isn't a waste of time. It's just another idiotic thing that old people say. They said the same about Twitter, by the way. They were like, "Oh, nonsense. Who's going to say anything meaningful in 256 characters?" So, yeah, I thought TikTok's really interesting. I was watching the stats, another kind of fastest growing social media platform ever type dynamic, and I thought I should try it, and I started producing some mind-numbingly boring videos which got no views at all. And I just persisted, and I thought I don't know how this works, so I just started creating different kinds of video, just forgetting about production values. And then it just happened that I was just walking along the street and I said something about how to cope with um, working in an office environment if you're not neurotypical or whatever. It was just a response to some question somebody had asked. I think it got 1 million views. And I was like, oh, wow. Oh, that's really odd. And so it's been really strange because I've continued sort of churning out content. And a lot of it is low production value, off the cuff. And I cannot figure out for the life of me why some of it is super successful and some of it just bombs. I literally, I have no idea. The only trick is to just keep plugging away. So yeah.
Nice, nice.
But just one last thing on that. I had two conversations today via TikTok. One from a guy who's trying to help contractors in the US, trying to help them with their interpersonal skills, and another from a guy who's writing a book also in the US about context and about how context affects everything in IT and also dealing with human beings. So it's brought me some interesting conversations.
Mm. Do you? It's interesting. I think with TikTok, there's something around, like you say, the constant kind of do many. It seems to me like the more you do on a weekly, the more. But I guess it's attention, right? It's just being in front of the eyes more and more and more. Um, but yeah, your TikToks are often you facing the camera, right? Like the ones which I've seen is you facing the camera. Often it's answering questions or having a thought, and I really enjoy them personally. I enjoy them. Um, do you think Do you think when it comes to the TikTok, the algorithm is a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's good. I think it's TikTok is the most successful learning platform that humanity has seen so far. Really interesting because Google and there's problems with all the different platforms, Google, YouTube, all things like that. It does something different. So the Google, YouTube, they're all good platforms because they feed you what you've asked for, right? So here's more of that stuff. What TikTok does differently is there's fundamentally two drivers, push and pull, in learning. The pull is the stuff that you're interested in. So the algorithm does what every algorithm does, whether it's since Pinterest, which is picks up what you're interested in, feeds you more. But it also does push. And that's what differentiates it. I haven't seen that since StumbleUpon. You remember StumbleUpon?
Mm,
StumbleUpon was an algorithm where you'd say what you're interested in. You just keep hitting the button StumbleUpon, and it would feed you stuff that you're interested in, but also some other stuff. And so here's the interesting thing. I see videos from people with 0 likes regularly. Just stop and think about that for a second. How the hell did the algorithm send me a video from somebody with 0 likes? But the fact that it does is what makes a difference. So it pushes, and it will occasionally feed you something that you didn't think you were interested in. Magnet fishing. I've seen videos on. God knows the algorithm would never. I've never even mentioned the words magnet fishing, and then I'm on TikTok and I'm watching videos of people magnet fishing. Think, oh, this is quite interesting,
yeah.
and so it pushes me in new directions, and that's what makes it exciting. Is that every other platform will say, "Oh, you're interested in baking brownies? Here's more baking videos," but TikTok says, "Have a look at this. This is weird. What do you think of that? Look at this person." And I
Mm.
think it gets the balance right somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I think about some of my TikTok videos, I'm looking at beekeeping.
Yeah.
I'm looking at kind of pottery,
Mm.
and actually a lot of it is around tradesmen and using the tools and the skills, creating pots and little. I think there was like a little Chinese kettle what was being made, and they made it from a. It's just, yeah, it's fascinating. There's something around. I
It
think
is.
I like the idea of someone being crafty with their hands and the expertise. We hear a lot around expertise is dead. long live the generalist, but then you watch someone create a kettle from like this kind of little this raw commodity. There's something quite special about that.
I've seen those. I love them. Just
Yeah.
a lump of clay and they roll it out and cut it so precisely and curve it. And then before you know it, it's this kind of beautiful piece of pottery, teapot. And you think, wow. And it sort of
Mm,
restores your faith in humanity. I think the other thing I really like about it and is seeing people from the corners of the world and how they live in a way that, and a lot of people have highlighted this, is that the media is so sort of sanitized. Everything from bed bugs in Paris, what's going on there, to people living in some remote village in Mongolia, how basic their life is, thanks to the power of mobile phones and the internet. You get a glimpse into that.
mm. Uh, yeah, yeah. It is an interesting one. I think media is an interesting one, and we might end up going down a whole Joe Rogan spiel here. But um, there's something around what the media puts out. If is there a hidden agenda behind it or whatever else? And I guess the one which I've heard a lot around is AI. Right? I think you can't go on LinkedIn, you can't look on the news, you can't look anywhere without AI being mentioned.
Mm,
And I was having a conversation with my brother. My brother's a gas engineer,
mm,
and I was like, "You're going to be the expert of the future." And you're an expert already, but my job's going to be taken at one point or another. The creative aspect is already there, the sparring partner of an AI, and even just the basic AI where it is now to where it's going to go. Um, there's something around the skills of the future. So if you've got a young, I don't know, a young adult coming into the world, do you tell them to go into HR or do you tell them to go and be a sparker or a gas engineer? How would you approach that conversation?
Oh, blimey. I have had to do this. So, if it's interesting to people, I'm happy to do it again. So, talk about AI and where that's going to go. I was doing it a few days ago, talking about AI in the future. And it's pretty straightforward, I think. It's not, I think we were consistently lied to. Not lied to, but we were just idiots, frankly. So, I remember going to see World Economic Forum things, decades basically, of them saying, don't worry about automation. AI and robots are only going to take the routine jobs. You know, all of the high value, like, not the blue collar stuff. All of the working class are screwed, but we don't care about those, do we? Because we're the middle classes and we'll be
Mm,
fine. Well, that was a whole load of rubbish. All of those projections. It's like the way Harvard Business Review, I think, published an article recently saying, "Oh, that really took us by surprise, ChatGPT. Oh, thanks very much. So we were reading your nonsense for decades. You didn't have a clue, did you? Because look at what AI actually took. Programming."
mm,
What do you want to, a job for the future? Go into computers? Oh no, no, it took programming first. Artwork. I just use Midjourney for everything now. I'm really sorry, but I can have whatever artwork. I don't need to worry about you know libraries like I did. Prose, fiction. I could probably get a J.K. Rowling Harry Potter novel in the next 10 minutes if I wanted. So it's the creative stuff, and it will go off to medical and legal and so on in turn. But I think the the direction of that was a guy called Martin Ford who wrote a book called Rise of the Robots. And the point he made was quite simple, which is AI takes all the jobs. Don't listen to this sort of hybrid nonsense. We're going to have better lives, better jobs. AI does take all of the jobs. It's just a question of time. And there's a
mm,
2 by 2 grid that you can draw, which I drew in this presentation, which is about, commercial return and feasibility. So the ones that go first are the ones where there's a high commercial return and it's really easy to do. So the intellectual ones, so writing a book, writing music, stuff like that. The ones that go last are where it's tough to do. So anything that involves robotics, so military is actually quite tough to do, but there's a good commercial return. Nursing, so Japan are working on robots from a nursing perspective. It's just a bit tricky because of, well, a whole bunch of factors. But then there's stuff where there's very little commercial return, and is tough to do. So yoga instructor would be an example. Of course, you can watch a virtual CGI yoga instructor, but actually having a robot that does yoga instruction is low. So you asked the question, I'm going to answer it. So what should you do? Well, the answer I gave was handmade pottery. Handmade pottery. Now, handmade pottery is a kind of a euphemism, I guess, for stuff where even though you can buy it cheaper and better, people will pay more because a human made it. So
mm,
handmade pottery is more expensive than machine made, and it's less perfect, but people will buy it for that reason. Same with handbags, luxury goods. Same with a meal. You might want to say, um, we went out for a meal cooked by a human. And same with theatre, because you can go to a cinema and see something that is streets ahead of what you see a small theatre with local players. But you go to the theatre because that's an experience of a different kind. So I think that there is a small niche, not because humans will be able to do it better, but because it will be a distinguisher culturally. It will be distinctive. It will be unique. It will be luxury. An
Mm,
experience design fits that bracket. It's kind of like, yeah, you can have your VR Disneyland, or you can do the real thing. Real
yeah.
things can be a lot more expensive, but and it might not even be as good. VR, roller coasters might be on Mars,
Yeah.
but it's real. You can
It's,
boast
it's
about it.
Well, there's something about, I guess, when I think about kind of experience design, like you go from commodities to to products, from products to services, from services to experience, and so on.
Mm.
But I think what you've just touched on there is something around the vulnerability aspects. Like with the human theatre, there's always something that could go wrong, right? There's something where someone might trip over, we might say the words wrong, and I wonder if what you're actually paying for, or what you're trying to gain, is the what if? Like in a world where everything's so safe, you'll pay for the thing what isn't. And
Mm.
when you do skydiving, you pay for skydiving, but you also pay for the fact of it's gonna be adrenaline and maybe the chute won't open. Who knows? Like there's something around, even though it's 99.9% sure, there's still that element of vulnerability and risk and kind of not opportunity, that's the wrong word, but there's something there. And you kind of got me thinking around the pottery, and I don't know what this is, but I think is it in Japanese or Chinese culture where they fill the cracks in vases with gold, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
And I think that's really nice. What you just touched on about human, we're ultimately paying for the gold, the cracks. Maybe I don't know. I
Have
don't
you ever
know.
done skydiving?
Yes, I have.
How many? When did you do it? How many times?
So I've done it. I've done it once. So I've done base jumping and skydiving. Um, skydiving, I did it for my 30th. So I'm 40 now. So 10 years ago it was. That was an experience. Do it. So we went up, and obviously you have a guy on the back of you. So I think I did the highest one you can do. So it wasn't like on a static line. And we went up there. There's some weird things what you remember. And I had this human backpack on the top of
Yeah,
my ass,
yeah,
shimmying to the edge of the door. He
yeah,
opens up the
yeah,
door, loads of wind. I remember there's a bit where he was sat on the edge of the plane. I was hanging over with my legs out, and he said, "If you just look down there, you can see river." It was in Lake District, and as I looked down, he tippled out head first.
mm,
And I just remember, yeah, it was a great experience, but really scary, but amazing at the same
yeah.
time.
I
How
did
about
it
you? Have you
three
done it?
three weeks ago for the first time.
Oh wow!
1,500 feet. Yeah, it's because it was my wife's birthday, and it was something that she talked about, and I was terrified of doing it, frankly, because I don't really like heights. So
Okay.
yeah, but yeah, the thing that I was actually most scared of actually was not being able to do it. So for me, it was a sense because it's exactly as I described. I wasn't sure if I was going to be one of those people who's just like panics. I'll tell you why, because I've done Tough Mudder, and there's part of the Tough Mudder course. There's a plank, and the plank I don't know 15 foot or something. It's not very high. It's not very high at all above the water. And I remember getting to the end of the plank and thinking, I can't do it. I can't do it. And actually really struggling to jump off. And I thought, well, this is 1,500 feet. I thought,
Mm,
what if I'm just become this coward who just can't, who scrambles, says, no, no, and breaks down. But somehow, perhaps because of the fear of that, I did it. So now I know I'm capable of doing it, and I feel good about that. But I mean, it wasn't my, I felt sick. I thought I was going to lose my hearing. It's just crazy.
Oh, amazing. It's I think the other thing what I remember was the landing. So did you have to pull your knees into your kind
Yeah,
of legs to slide in on
yeah.
your ass? Um, but it was
Mm,
funny. Someone was asking me about it. Actually, it was my big brother Lee. He was saying like, did they tell you what to when you skydive? Did they tell you what leads to pull and stuff like that? I was like, no. Well, maybe they did, and I forgot. But at
mm.
no point did someone say, if something goes south and your guy passes out, this is what you need to do. They just show me how
Yeah,
to land.
yeah,
And I started thinking, why is that? And I thought, If you're starting to freak out, you start pulling stuff. Maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was nuts because they gave us this briefing that made it sound like it was just going to be, just I don't know, fun and butterflies the whole way. They were like, "There's going to be a photographer. You could fist bump him, and you could do your hearts and the thing." When we actually fell out, we were laughing about it. We were just like, "Ah!" for like a minute. We couldn't have. It's just completely incoherent screaming and panic, sheer panic. It's like we couldn't have done any of that. So yeah, you're right, just as well.
Would you do it again?
I think I would do it again. I think I'd get earplugs uh, second time
Mm.
round. But yeah, I would do it again, I think.
And do you think your second time round would be better than your first?
Yeah, because I'd know what to expect. I don't think they're really prepared. I would redesign the experience because I think that the briefing didn't enable people to get the best out of it because it didn't really properly prepare. So my wife couldn't breathe. She was like, "I can't breathe,"
Same.
yeah, really, that's good. I'll tell her that because I was fine. So, but I think had they said that, she wouldn't have panicked in the way she did, and the same for me. I mean, I felt sick. I thought I was going to throw up, and I was like, I wonder where the sick's going to go. Is it going to up, or is it going to be down, or what? What if it falls on somebody? That's going to spoil their photographs. So, so yeah,
Yeah. I yeah, I think so. I had the same. So I had a camera, sounds similar to you. The guy felt dropping out, and we kept lifting my head up, so I could get a camera. But every time I lifted my head up, I couldn't breathe. And
yeah,
when I put my head down to my chin, I could breathe again. But it was
yeah,
really hard.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
really hard. Um,
Mm.
so I just got thinking, maybe some of my listeners don't know who you are. So I want to know a little bit more about the Nick, the full Nick. So Nick, I want you to pick a number between 1 and 12, please.
11.
11. Okay. So I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to ask it right at the end for the answer. So the question you've picked is: if you had a time machine, which mistake would you go back to resolve? Okay. So
Mm.
pause. We'll come
Yeah,
back to it later on. But as I alluded to earlier, you have a podcast, or did have a podcast, and it was based on um, randomness and selection, and there's an element of design your own adventure there to a point. Now, the way your game set up was you picked how extreme you wanted it to be. You had a set of cards, and you could be extreme or non-extreme. Am I doing it justice there, Nick?
yeah, it's right. There were three decks, and I think they ranged from sort of pretty tame. I think I probably sorted them. I don't think in the original deck they were sort of nice. Say I sorted them into what I felt was tame, moderately provocative, and then kind of extreme. And then I would ask people, "Do you want to go all in or whatever?" And the extreme ones, some of them were really, as you remember, they were kind of relating to. My favourite one was when I asked Charlie, "What do you find um, sexual in the workplace?" And he hesitated and he said, "Well, I think the marker pens." And I said, "I'm sorry, Charlie. What do you mean the marker pens?" And he was like, "Well, when you kind of, hold them in your hand, the kind of the feel of a good chunky kind of marker pen." And I was like, "Wow, this is just completely fetishized marker pens in the workplace now." But yeah, I remember yours. I'm not going to repeat it, but that was quite graphic. I thought I really enjoyed it. I would have carried on doing it if I think I didn't have anything else to do.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah.
it's I think podcasting is an interesting one, and I've got two other shows which I'm wanting to do, but one of them is around extreme worlds, like who lives in the extreme version of this scenario. I'm then interviewing them. So people like the people who have these adult sex parties. That's an extreme world, and I want to know more about that person and that ticks. But I think the trick is finding the people who's interesting and who is just open for a conversation and kind of throws not caution to the wind, but isn't worried about just having a convo. Um, Now I've picked, I think, five cards from this pack. And what I want you to do, Nick, is we're going to ask all 5 questions. Unfortunately,
Mm.
there's no way to go, but you just decide which order we're going in. So
Cool.
go for it. Pick the question between 1 and 5, a number.
One.
Number one. Okay, your question is, what business do you dream of starting?
Bloody business. Sod off. Sod off with the fucking business. I think that's the answer is don't dream of starting any sodding business. It's like asking somebody what kind of shoes would you like to spend the rest of your life making? It's like we're kind of people obsessed, trapped in this bubble of business. I mean, because anytime you start a business, you are enslaving yourself to some extent to commerce. And so I don't dream of starting any business. I dream of doing nothing related to the corrupting influence of business. I do not idolize business people. I find them quite often tiresome. And I think that there are real people hiding behind the business roles and real lives being crushed under the wheel of business. So I don't have a good feeling about business. I have a good feeling about people. I have a good feeling about ideas. I have a good feeling about experiences, but a business doesn't have positive associations, and I don't dream of starting any business.
Interesting. And we mentioned earlier before. I think we hit record. We was talking about you've been traveling about a little bit recently, and you talked about Austin. So the thing what I like about the business is it's not you being a collector of experiences, I guess. Um,
Mm.
how was Austin? Like it seems to be a bit of a not a haven, but everyone seems to be talking about Austin at the moment. Why? Did you notice the reason behind that?
Not really. I mean, I used to go back and forth to Houston when I was working for BP on a monthly basis, and it's just a concrete nightmare, really. Houston. You can be in the centre of Houston and drive for kind of 50 miles, and you'll still be in any direction. You'll still be in Houston. People have no idea how big it is, and it's just concrete as far as the eye can go. And I remember saying to somebody in Houston, um, where I don't feel like this is the real Texas. And they said, well, if you want the real Texas, you should go to Austin. So we went to Austin. And actually, I went to Austin Community College because they asked me to speak. And that was extraordinary. They have 70,000 students a year, and they are doing stuff that's transformative for people's lives. One of the students talked about when they joined, they couldn't read and write. And one of their teachers stayed behind every night to teach them. Somebody else said, I lost both my brothers in Afghanistan and Iraq, and this has been like a family to me. The stories were extraordinary. The work they were doing is absolutely amazing. The new chancellor spent a week living as a homeless person in Austin to kind of relate to the lowest level of poverty, and it was just out of this world what they were doing. But the city itself was disappointing, I think, in a few ways. It you probably know about this in the US. We thought we sort of walk around, but basically only homeless people walk around in most American cities. So, that you're just there doesn't have the buzz of it of a European city. So we hunted down some of the most iconic places. We played mini golf. It was fun. We went to Franklin Barbecue. We had beef brisket. That was good. And we went to the Broken Spoke, which we were told was the iconic Wild West kind of bar. And yeah, people were dancing, but I don't know. There wasn't. It all felt a bit Vegas. It felt a bit kind of. It felt like probably there is a real Texas, but it wasn't in the city. It felt like it was sort of a bit put on for tourists. And I was talking to somebody actually at Austin College who said it had changed a lot, and that was one of the things that changed. So I think it's sort of in search of authenticity, and I'm not sure we quite found it there.
Mm, interesting. So we talked about the experiences and you being a collector of experiences. This isn't one of the cards, by the way. If you have a treasure chest and you can put a memory in that treasure chest, what you could go to time and time again, what one memory would you put in there?
What a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I do that. I do very consciously do that. I put memories in the treasure chest. There's so many in there um, that I wouldn't know where to start. But I think when my wife and I went to Tulum, um, and I proposed to her actually in Tulum in Mexico. I think that was it's quite an extraordinary experience. try to design it as such. And what I liked about it was everything clicked. All of the things, I told. I'll tell you the story. I told her that I wanted to film a TikTok of her going to the room, so that I was walking, behind her as she sort of went into the room and opened the curtains, and then walked out onto the balcony, and there was a view over the sea. And she did all of that. It all went to plan. And she turned around, and then I had the ring, and it's kind of she said, "Thank God," she said yes, and then there was kind of champagne and stuff. So yeah, it was good, really good. That was a great memory.
Nice, nice. Um, can you remember what the weather was like on that day? Obviously, it's probably an easier answer, but yeah, tell me a couple of random things you remember about that day.
Yeah, I remember being a little bit anxious about whether or not the staff were going to bring the champagne on time because I wanted everything to go to plan. I was worried about, whether she's going to turn around or kind of figure out what was going on, or it wasn't going to work quite right, or the weather was beautiful. I remember what the balcony looked like, what the room looked like. I remember what she was wearing. Um, I remember that she put her hands to her face in a way that she subsequently thought was kind of cliched, but she now realised was quite natural. So yeah.
Nice. I think the bit where you mentioned there, the kind of whether everything, the staff. I think when you become a designer of experiences, the anxiety of the importance of the little big things that matter. I don't
Yeah.
think people understand it is the detail. It's the detail what is the thing what matters. And
Mm.
I think we've both talked about this in the past, but like I think I talk about it from like a nano, micro, macro point of view for design and experience, and I think you talk about it from a large and a small. Um, but it's that anxiety of a detail, the smell, the sense, the space, what we're in, all that good stuff. And I guess you've just amplified the reason why it's so important. You can remember these tiny little details.
Mm.
Um, what's again? I'm not on the cards here, but if you could change one detail of the working world, what would you change?
Interesting. I think the well, so I'm going back to the data because I spend a lot of time interviewing people joining organisations and stepping into different roles, and I think that I know for a fact what makes the most difference, and it's having a buddy. And I think that you can design whatever kind of leadership or induction program you like, but the thing that will make, I know that for sure, the thing that will make most difference to a person when they join an organization is having a buddy. And I think those are tremendously challenging periods of time, and they can make the difference in staying or leaving, and leaving, they can be definitive. So I think that that would be one thing. Everybody should be assigned a buddy, especially at those kind of key transitions, and that should be done much more systematically and carefully than it is today. Today, it's a kind of haphazard process.
Mm, mm. And there's something around who identifies that buddy. Do you identify that buddy? Does the business identify it? It's a bit like that whole kind of thing of who decides who's going to be a leader and who's not. And I guess in your experience, have you found that actually 50% of finding the right buddy is finding the relationship, the connection, the ease, or not?
Well, it's a good question, and I think AI might help. I actually introduced a platform at Deloitte, kind of small plug, I suppose, called Guider, and they had a buddy matching. It was designed for coaching and mentoring, but we were using it in a slightly different way. But the idea was that my team used to call it slightly unnervingly Tinder for mentors, which is not the ideal positioning, but it gave you a sense of how it worked, which is you
Mm,
would go on and you would say, I'm looking for a buddy, mentor, coach, and other people would say, hey, I'm a coach, mentor, buddy. And it would give you a choice of people. It would do some matching. And then, you kind of try them out with a virtual meeting first and see if the chemistry was there. So, yeah.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, pick another number. So you've got four remaining, Nick.
Two.
Number two. Okay. If you were braver, what would you be doing with your life?
Oh, I think, blimey, I have been braver. I think this was the thing that I was always very reluctant to do, going out on my own. So at this point, it is all it's bravery all the way. I'm doing some of the most extreme kind of things that I could ever have dreamed of, including jumping out of planes. But that's only a very small part of it. So um, I think I'm sort of at that limit. If I can think of anything braver than what I'm doing, I will probably go after it. But at the moment, I can't.
And you talked about you kind of, you've done it alone. Um, Based on the wisdom and the knowledge, if you got someone on this listening to this podcast right now, what one piece of advice would you give to them who may be sitting on either deciding to go it alone or just making that leap of being a little bit more braver?
Hmm. I don't know. I think I would say listen to people get lots of perspectives from people who have made that jump, because it's very easy to be misled by people and you say, oh yeah, it's great, it's like, oh, it's wonderful, but actually there's pros and cons to whatever you do, and there are pros and cons to going it alone, and
Mm.
you have to, you know, be confident that that's the bargain you want to strike.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, there's a trade-off for everything, right? I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
So I've just added another question in, Nick, just because why not?
You can, why
Yeah,
not?
yeah. I love having a power. So let's shuffle these up a bit. Okay, you got three remaining. Question between 1 and 3. Uh, number,
Three.
number. Dyslexia kicking
One.
in there.
What did you say you for that? So three remaining, but so there was. Let me get this straight. So there was five, and I chose one and two from the order. So there's
Yes.
three remaining, but you've
Uh,
decided to completely screw with the numbering convention.
yeah.
So the three remaining, you're now going to ask me
1, 2, and
from
3.
that set one, two, and three.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because you can. Right, I'm going to go with one. So the
1.
second number one,
Okay.
one,
You've
two,
got.
if you like.
Which of your friends do you envy the most?
Just before I answer this question, are you going to ask me to pick from the remaining cards and say which ones you want, one or two?
Correct.
Because then the answer is just going to, I'll tell you right now, it's going to be one for
Okay.
all of those. So yeah, just be one all the way.
Okay.
So
This is
yeah,
good.
which of my friends do I most envy?
Yeah.
I don't have. This is the sad thing. I don't have that many friends. So I've got a very limited pool of people from who to envy. I don't know. I think I don't. It's never occurred to me to envy somebody like in that way. So I don't. I really, honestly don't. I don't.
Mm.
I don't envy. I don't even if I looked at celebrities, I don't. I can't think of anybody I envy. I've been
Okay.
super fortunate, with my life, and I think I am. It sounds a bit syrupy, but I am genuinely so grateful for so many things. So yeah, envy doesn't really feature.
Okay. I want to need in on something there. So you mentioned you don't have many friends.
Mm.
um, is that a choice? Is that a just a life? Like what's that? Is it a case of you like a tight circle or?
I think it's just neurotype. I don't think it's. I'm not going to tell you anything particularly grand. I think it's just so. Part of my TikTok journey has been realizing that I've realized for some time I'm on spectrum. I don't make a big deal of it because I'm very wary of labels. Once you start to capitalize on a label, that, as I say, that's how you're flattened. But it turns out lots of people on TikTok, want to hear about that one, want to know what that journey is about. But the essence of it is you're more interested in ideas than people. That's what it boils down to. So um, I've always my friends are the ideas that kind of circulate like crows over my head on a daily basis. Follow me around. My friends are philosophers and philosophies, more philosophies than philosophers. Frankly, I don't really give a crap about the philosopher, and so it's just I think a you're somewhere. Everyone is somewhere on a sliding scale, and for
Mm.
me, the things that I'm drawn to, the things that I carry with me, the things that are part of my life are ideas generally more than people.
Nice. So I guess you talked there around kind of the whole sliding scale, and I guess my take on things is everyone's neurodiverse in one way or another, which probably is time everyone kidding it. Like, but that's that sliding scale. You got I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic. You've talked about your journey.
Mm.
Um, is this something what's still I guess in work, in company life, is this something what's still massively overlooked? I guess let me tell you where I'm coming from with this. So there's something around the neurodiversity and the whitewashing of it, and the let's pay lip service to it. And then there's a few companies who kind of come to mind who go, they get it, they value it, and it's cooked into every single thread of life. Like I don't know, what's your what's your take?
I love your question. I'm laughing because you know the answer to that, right? Because I hired you into a company because I wanted and have consistently wanted diversity, and a track record shows that I've always gone after that. And I thought you had so much to bring. As bad luck would have it, I was away on holiday when you joined, and you'd made it clear, and I had made it clear that your dyslexia was something that we needed to accommodate. And there were lots of statements wafting around that particular organisation around how we welcome diversity, blah blah blah, including neurodiversity. Yeah, but the reality was, and you actually charted. I remember reading your deconstruction. It was like an autopsy of every, almost like minute by minute, what happened. And the short version is you were just treated just like everybody else. Told, here's a whole bunch of documents. Go off. Write this, do that. And it was like, wow, you just kind of crushed the life out of that poor bloke. You gave him exactly the opposite treatment than you would need if you were actually flexing to meet somebody's needs. And it was horrific watching it. It was like a car crash. And I think by the time I came back from holiday, you were already gone. She was very
Mm,
sad. But so yeah, I mean, there is lip service in lots of senses. I think paid to diversity. Some of it's deliberate. I guess most of it's not deliberate. I think people are well intentioned, but they just haven't had enough engagement with diversity to really understand what embracing it would mean. They like the idea, but they don't like actually having to confront it.
mm. So you mentioned, you've kind of you've always kind of been semi-aware of it and stuff. How have you kind of navigated it? I guess the way I'm thinking about it is that maybe there's people who are coming into the working world new. Maybe they're fresh into the working world, or maybe they're a few years in and they're like, how do I navigate this complex system? And how do I, you're not going to bend the system to your will, but what tips do you have to kind of help people along and help them, yeah, I guess thrive a little bit more?
It's kind of a big question you're asking there.
Mm,
How do you navigate what people? So I've had to learn the hard way. Basically, there's I sometimes think of myself as a kind of a Mr. Bean character because I go through life. I seem to make all the mistakes, and hopefully learn from them. I'll tell you about one mistake I remember making at BP. I was so transfixed by the idea that we should shift away from doing complete nonsense in learning and actually do something useful to people that we had a management team meeting, all my peers, and I basically did a very cut and dry, very clear, structured presentation that I would said, all of this stuff that you're doing is a complete waste of time, and that if you actually wanted to make a difference to people in this organization, you should do this thing over here. And there was a consultant from Deloitte, very senior consultant, along there observing it. And at the end, she said to me quietly, she said, do you think you'll remember this moment, Nick, as the point where you alienated all of your colleagues? And I had a habit of speaking truth to power, I guess, in a way which either it's not because you can come off as trying to be sound noble in doing that, but it just wasn't effective. It wasn't going to achieve the result I wanted to achieve. So it was just stupid. So I think I'm not afraid of being stupid. I kind of make mistakes all the time, but I think it took me a lot of really reflecting on what I was doing, listening to other people, seeing what other people were doing to really figure out. So I learned a lot from Gemma, for example. Gemma is relentlessly positive.
mm,
I learned about the power of relentless positivity. I learned a lot from Kenny. Kenny could step in an elevator, Kemi Tuowo, and I would stand there like any normal introvert, trying to avoid to make eye contact and looking at my phone. And he would say to people, "Hey, I love your jacket. That's great. Where did you get that? That badge you're wearing, what is that?" And instantly he was able to connect with people. So the answer is you can engineer, if you're not good at these things, you can engineer your way out of your shortcomings, but it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of practice.
mm. At what point does that, like you say, it takes a lot of hard work. And I guess, I hate being in I love being in social circles where I like the people. I hate being in conferences where you're like, I'm just going to stand here like a lemon, and you see people who just walk over to groups like, hey, and I'm like, I can't think of anything worse. And I know for a fact when I would go over, I'd be introducing a really good conversation what I can add no value to, and then I just slowly fade away. Um, but at what point? Where's the tipping point on that? Because you've got to do lots and lots of practice and lots of engineering, and like the effort is coming from you. It's coming from
Yeah.
you every time. At what point, when does that juice, when does that lemon run out of juice? And when does it a point where you have to turn to the business and go, no, this is a two-way street. You've got to start giving back, I guess.
Well, I think in my case, the answer to tipping point is for every hour of interaction along those lines, you need 2 hours of recovery. It's it's immensely effortful, and I think what I realised at Deloitte, especially, is people thought that lockdown was good for introverts. It was crushing because I went from a full day in London in the office would be 6, 7, maybe 8 meetings. I was doing back to back. I was averaging like 12, 13 meetings a day. I started to notice weird things happening to me. So I could really focus for the first 4 or 5 meetings. And after that, began to dissociate. I began to look at myself. It was like an outer body experience. I could see myself. I could see my mouth moving and talking. I could hear myself saying things, but I'd gone into some sort of weird kind of autopilot mode. And I think ultimately I was like, well, you can't carry on doing that. So I think that there is, yeah, I mean, I found the tipping point. It's going to be different for different people depending on their tolerance, but I think I push myself to the absolute limit in terms of acting like a neurotypical person in order to succeed and to fit in and so on. And then ultimately realized, yeah, it was just costing me too much to do that.
Mm, mm. And I think that's a shame. Like, I think that's a shame. There's lots of opportunity there, and I guess it feels like there's always something what the business want to do, and one quarter will concentrate on well-being, the next quarter will concentrate on neurodiversity, the next quarter, and it's like, no, it's not a quarter shot in the arm kind of approach. It's something what has to be threaded into the DNA. I don't know. I kind of just see it as a dance. It's a dance, and you can dance alone, but it's more enjoyable when you dance with someone else. And I think that's how you should be with a business and how a business should be with you. But maybe that's just me living in a fantasy world.
Well, the fact there is a fantasy about diversity and inclusion, and because it makes life harder. You know, this is the thing that nobody wants to say, because the point is that people react against difference. They react against people who are different to them. They want to hire people who are the same as them instinctively, because people who are different to you challenge you. They do
Mm,
things in a different way. They disagree with you. And the problem is that diversity does bring enormous benefits. It brings resilience, it brings creativity, it brings growth. But all of these things they're not easy. They come at a cost. And so when you're going to hire somebody who is different to you in a team, so I'm a challenger if you're looking at business types, that means that I'm slightly maverick, I like the big idea, whatever, but I miss the details, and people in policy hate me. The policy and the detail people hate me, but I need them. I need them
mm,
desperately, because precisely the person who's most different to me is the person who complements me and gives an organization that rounded capability. So this is the thing that people, they're right, there are enormous benefits, but you have to be prepared to be challenged and to grow, and to acknowledge that somebody who is different to you also has value. And although people would say, oh, of course I do that, they don't in practice. People like themselves. Part of how everybody values themselves is saying, I'm good the way I am. And so if somebody's very different, that's a challenge at kind of every level.
interesting. Speaking of challenge, um, let's talk about how we challenge L&D. So, Nick, your background is L&D. It's in many things, I guess. And your book, it's on version 2 right now.
Yeah.
Version 2, yep. Book is How People Learn. Um, how should we not do L&D? I guess, other than buying your book, right this second and understanding that. Um, how has your thinking, I guess, evolved onto that from the book one all the way through to today? Has it evolved, or is it just fermenting more, and it's kind of like, no, this is the right thing?
I think understanding learning was really a sort of a stepping stone towards understanding cognition. So, and understanding cognition unlocks the ability to understand all kinds of things like ethics, like language, like technology. So, at the moment, a lot of what I'm thinking about, looking at learning was only ever a stepping stone and quite a small one in a sense at that. So, you talked about time machines. So I guess I feel more and more like a visitor from the future. So it's like being asked to talk about some kind of medieval topic, like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. But I'm happy to do it. So imagine that when you were young, you cared a lot about curing people, and for many years you studied homeopathy. And you went to homeopathy conferences, and you were deep into the homeopathy literature, and you were trying different things and passionate about it. And then there was some sort of turning point in your life. Maybe a relative died, and the homeopathic treatment didn't work, and you sort of it broke the illusion for you, and you realized that it was like a cult. It was just kind of nonsense. And you actually then went on to study medicine, and you kind of graduated medicine, became a doctor. A couple of things that would go through your head. You probably wouldn't want to go to homeopathy conferences. If you did, you probably wouldn't want to stand up and say, stop doing what you're doing. It's a bunch of nonsense, really. And part of the reason for that is not arrogance, it's that you care about the same things that the people there care about. They may be practicing homeopathy, and it may be a bunch of nonsense, but you respect them because they also care about the motivation is good, right? They want to get people better. They just don't know how to do it. And then one day you might pluck up the courage, and you might go along to a conference and say, "Stop what you're doing. This is all nonsense." You might think they're going to lynch me, and what they do instead is they just kind of applaud, and they smile, and they carry on doing exactly what they're doing. And you realize it's more unstoppable than you imagined. That you can't simply, say the game is up, the cat is out of the bag. So I don't think I've ever really had a learning conversation. I don't think I've ever really met anybody who's working in learning. I don't think we have a learning industry. I don't think we have learning conferences. I think we have education conferences. I
Mm.
think we have people to talk about education. I think we have education systems. And I think education is this sort of weird ritual that God knows will just evaporate the same way that, the four humours. Did you know for thousands of years, medical doctors believed four humours, that every human being had black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and whatever it was, sanguine, and that was the basis of medical knowledge. And then at some point, we just realised it was nonsense. So I think that your question is, at what point will we realise that what we're doing wasn't really anything to do with learning, was just this sort of weird Victorian hang up? And I think that point might come quite soon, because I guess we'll start to see AI produce kind of performance guidance systems, which will basically do away with the need to develop capabilities and kind of university. And so university will become this sort of handmade pottery thing. If you want to spend 4 years hanging out with people and you've got the money to do that, then cool. Which was a little bit like the Grand Tour that hundreds of years ago people used to, the aristocrats as part of their education used to do this kind of grand tour of Europe and kind of trek around. So I think that my view on learning might seem incomprehensible. There might be some people listening to this who are very much at the fringe. You can sort of glimpse what I'm trying to say, which is that we haven't been doing learning. I mean, of course, learning happens. You learn. There's a dog here, in case you're wondering why I'm slightly distracted at points. This dog sitting at my feet learns, and learns in pretty much exactly the same way that human beings does. Has never spent a day in a classroom, sitting behind a desk looking at a PowerPoint slide. So I don't think we've been doing learning. I don't think we've begun to understand learning. I don't think we've really begun to talk about learning. And I don't think that will happen in my lifetime, probably. But I don't really mind about that. It will happen eventually. And I'm happy about that. I'm not fixated on accomplishing that. I don't need to
Mm.
spend the rest of my life, dragging people through the do learning, not education. If people invite me to talk about the distinction, I'm happy to show up. Um, and I like to think that there might be one or two people in the audience who kind of get what I'm saying, but I'm not counting on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I remember having a conversation with Helen Marshall maybe 3 years ago, and was talking about content production. I was like, "Don't bother. Like, if you're looking at where you go with your career," I said, "Don't bother. You got synthetic media. What will come out, and like, that will produce." And similar to like what you said, you got Midjourney, and I want knocks up content like there's no tomorrow. They're quick. They're nice images, and I had her on the podcast last week actually. I was like, "Here we are, 3 years on. Are you glad you didn't get into content and you learn?" She's like, "Yes." And I think the natural step, which you mentioned there, like the performance systems and stuff like that, it's just a natural step. So then I guess the way I kind of see this is, I think it's not just me, yourself, many others have kind of talked about the L&D team should really just be a human problem solving team. I think for me, that's how I kind of look at it.
Yeah, okay. But, right, let me pick that up because that's interesting. So, Gemma, I think, originally credited the phrase build useful stuff because we did a lot of performance stuff, resources, not courses, right? The thing that people don't get about that is learning elimination. So, that's why performance support is as effective as it is because you're eliminating the need to learn. So, it's the opposite of learning. So I have no beef with performance support. It's great. I think performance guidance systems are the way forwards. And I love creating performance support because it makes people's life easier. And it does that by removing their need to learn, which is why if you look at performance support books, there's nothing about learning theory in them. So great. Yeah, but that's not. So even if you were doing that, making people's lives easier, creating resources, performance guidance, sat nav for everything, you haven't yet started doing learning. You're actually doing learning in relation. What would it look like if you actually started doing learning? Well, then all of your work would be around creating moving experiences, whether that's storytelling or simulation or situation or any of those. That is experience design because if you look back at your life, your learning will have come from the challenges that you've been through, from the experiences that you've had in your life. Fundamentally, that's what learning is because that's how memory works. You encode your reactions to something. So that's about crafting experiences which transform people. But why do I say we haven't started doing that? Because you might say, well, there's loads of people doing experience design, blah blah blah. Yeah, but we're doing it in this kind of the way people built bridges before we had physics. They're like, oh yeah, that worked. I'll do that again. And so we don't have a science and understanding of it. We know that you can push people in experiences. You know that you can design scenarios and simulations that somehow impact people, but it's still, kind of a proto-science. We don't
Mm.
have a theory that underpins what we're doing. So we're making progress with kind of trial and error. But even that is delightful. The kind of work that you do with experience design, absolutely delightful. It is the way forwards, and I hope it will eventually shine a light on the need to understand why these things that we're doing work and do it in a more scientific way.
I think I think there's just a way of which we look at work differently. And I guess for me, when I think about the future of, I'm not going to use the word L&D because it's not that team. But when I think about the employee experience, I think um, it's a subscription service. Your people subscribe to whether they come into work all day or whether they don't, yearly, monthly, whatever. And that subscription is based on a collection of products. I'm using the term spies. I need to come up with something better. But subscription service, I mean, you've got your service, your products, your interactions, and your experiences. And they use them as do I subscribe to this for another year, another month, another day, whatever. But it's fascinating. So when I work with different people who are looking at their whole employee experience, they're still seeing a lot of it, either see it as comms, and employee experience is comms, or a lot of it is still in the yesteryear of HR. It's like a rebrand of HR. I'm like, no, it's something somewhat different. In fact, it's much different. It's how you look at the world and how you look at the challenges of the people in work.
Mm.
And I don't even mean in like a term of your day to day job. It's just the interactions from how they are, how you show up right away through to how you go on. There's your canvas.
Yeah.
But how do you bring people along on that? How do you start to get people to see work as a collection of products, services, interactions, and experiences versus policies, process?
I tried to answer that question because we did quite a lot. I did quite a lot of that work with Shane at the BBC, and we tried to redefine learning rather than as being a set of modules or whatever, as a service. And we worked with a company called Engine, who had done a lot of customer-based service design work. And I learned a lot from that. One of the things that I learned was the power of customer journey mapping, because it's exactly what you say, Danny, and you're absolutely on the money, which is employee experience is like customer experience. It's like and there's a beautiful book which has got lots of examples of I think it's called is it user experience mapping or customer experience mapping? Anyway, but the beauty of it is it takes the example of like going to a supermarket. And it does exactly what you're describing. The employee experience, the customer experience is every tiny little interaction. It's how it feels to arrive at the car park. Finding a trolley, how easy that is. Finding a trolley which is the right size for your shopping. How you're greeted at the doors, how the doors slide open, how the barriers work, how the thing is laid out, the lighting, the music, your interactions with other people. It's all in the detail, as we kind of said earlier. And yeah, and I think actually they were quite good at it. People doing kind of customer journey mapping in lots of disciplines were quite good. And I borrowed some of that thinking, and it is hugely helpful. So in answer to your question, how do you do that? I think really good customer journey mapping can help. You can say to people, look, this is what our employees experience, you know, every day. They arrive at the office, there's these huge doors that they have to push to get in. The security guard ignores them because they're on their phone. They have to swipe in at the thing. They have to queue for the elevator because there aren't enough elevators, and so on and so on and so on.
So many challenges to fix, Nick. So many challenges. I've got a couple more questions, but you still got your two cards here, and as you said, you're going to go with number one anyway. So let's see what number one is.
What is number one?
With whom is it not just revolting, but a little bit frightening to have imaginary sex with?
Crikey. Don't know. Blimey. Revolting and frightening.
Mm,
I don't know. It may be Ivanka Trump.
okay. Okay. I went with Margaret Thatcher just answer that
Did you?
question in my head.
Yeah. Similar
Mm,
genre. So I don't think she hasn't approached me. She's not in my DMs. So I don't think
okay.
there's any likelihood of that happening.
Yet, Nick. Yet. She might be a fan of Manchester podcast.
Yeah. God, yes. Let's hope not.
Before I get into the last card, I want you to picture the scenario. Breaking news: zombie apocalypse is about to happen. The one thing next to you right now is the tool that you're going to use to fend off a zombie. What are you picking up around you right now?
Blimey. I've got peanuts or a dog lamp. I've got these peanuts, so I could potentially kind of throw them at the zombies, but I don't think they'd really go for that because I think they just eat flesh, don't they?
Yeah.
So I think I might have to, sadly, I might have to batter them with this, which would be a
Ooh,
shame. It's quite hefty, but
that's
I
lovely.
think I might only dispatch one or two before it was just broken. So yeah, that might have to be that. Not really ideal. I mean, if I could get to the car, I've got lots of zombie apocalypse survival um, kit there.
Okay.
Yeah, but you've made me anxious now, Danny, because I feel like I need to have it like right to hand.
You've always got to be ready.
You're right.
Um, Tell me about your zombies apocalypse like go to. So let's picture World War Z. It's happening. You've got to get going. What's your plan? What's your plan of action? What's your next 5 steps?
Up in the attic. Most people make the mistake of thinking they have bug out bags, and they think they're going to grab the bug out bag and disappear into the wilderness. Problem is that unless they've trained for years to live in the wilderness, they're just going to die. It's like saying, I'm going to escape by building a raft and sailing off into the sea. It's like, how are you going to even survive? What do you know about what you can eat in the wilderness? Do you not realize that you won't be alone in the wilderness? There's every other misguided nutter, and there you are, with a piece of canvas to protect you, and all of your supplies, which all of the other nutters desperately want. It's kind of like the worst thing you could possibly do. So you're much safer actually preparing where you are. So the attic, because your zombies, or I mean, zombies is only a metaphor for what happens when society breaks down. And by the way, the best prediction is that that's going to happen between 10 and 30 years from now. So if you're not preparing for it, you've got your head in the sand. But yeah, up in the attic. I was in a taxi in Croatia talking about the peanut butter and honey that I had in the attic to this Croatian guy, and he said, "No, no, you got it all wrong." He said, "You don't want to stockpile that stuff." I said, "What do you stockpile then?" He said, "Vodka and cigarettes." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because in luxuries," he said, "I have lived through a war. And what I can tell you is that any war situation like that, luxuries are in short supply and you can trade them for anything. So you don't have to stockpile your antibiotics. You have to stockpile vodka and cigarettes and you can get whatever you
Mm,
need."
interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go. Top tip. Top tip.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, the other thing, by the way, the other top tip is work your way up the value chain. So don't head to Sainsbury's because every other maniac is headed to Sainsbury's. You need to figure out where the food warehouses are. Because what happens is everybody rushes to Sainsbury's and they clear the shelves, and then only very later on do they, because those resources are stripped bare, do they start to wonder where's the rest of the food. So a lot of it is sitting in distribution warehouses, right? So while everybody
mm,
else is racing to Sainsbury's, you race to the distribution warehouse.
interesting. Ah, there we go. There we
There you
go.
go.
It's fascinating. Um, I love The Walking Dead for this reason because I think The Walking Dead highlights actually the biggest problem is the humans in the world. In like the scariest thing in a zombie apocalypse isn't actually the zombies; it's the humans who have survived and what they'll do for that kind of to continue surviving.
Yeah, it is.
And it allows people to be there. You know, when we talk about your shadow self or whatever, it allows them to lean into that. Maybe I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, we've
I'm
got
going to
this
have
one.
to. Oh, you've got one more? I'm going to have to go in a bit. I did
Yeah.
ask my wife if she wanted to appear on the podcast, but she says no. She's just
No.
away. She's waved. She just said hi, Danny.
Hello.
She's looking far too glamorous to be on the podcast. She's just going to show me up, make me look like a scruff. But
Ah, okay. Yeah, don't do that. Oh, maybe do. Okay, last one then. Last one. No, we'll go with the one that we asked you right at the start. So you picked number 11, which was if you had a time machine, which mistake would you go back to resolve? Which one?
I do kind of have a time machine. So I suppose I do consider myself a bit of a time traveler. So it's not really a hypothetical situation, but I can answer your question, which is I'm a believer in Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, which is that you live your life exactly the same way, exactly, without any variation whatsoever. Otherwise, it wouldn't be you, um, eternally. So the answer to your question is really straightforward, which is I wouldn't change anything because then it wouldn't be me. It simply wouldn't be my life. So it would be somebody else. So somebody else would do that, but I wouldn't. That I'm just going to live it in exactly the same way forever.
Interesting. It reminds me of Alan Watts. I'm a fan of Alan Watts, and he talks
Yeah,
around the thing of you can dream and dream and dream, and eventually you'll want that thing of I want life.
yeah.
I want the kind of the randomness of life. I dream for something like that. Um,
Well, there's
Nick,
a lovely, if you, I mean, a film recommendation about time basically explores that concept, which is it's a British comedy basically. It's got a bit of a Four Weddings and a Funeral vibe, only because it's got Bill Nighy in probably. But this young lad discovers he can, in quite a modest way, sort of travel back in time just by standing in a cupboard and thinking about it. And in fact, everybody in his family can. And what he does is he'll live things badly and then he'll travel back and kind of fix them as you would. And then eventually he figures out why. Why not just live them well the first time round? Why, if you, so for example, he might be mean to somebody at a checkout and he thinks, oh, that was stupid. I'll go back and fix that. And he goes back and he's nice to them. And eventually he's like, why not just be nice to people first time round? So it's a lovely film to watch to illustrate that point.
nice. on that note, Nick, where can people find you? Where can people follow you? Where can we stay up to date with what you're up to and the ideas and thoughts you're sharing?
Everywhere. I'm an annoyance. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, doing provocative stuff. But what I do is I show up differently in different places. So I do kind of L&D businessy type stuff on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm much less active on it. I was sort of dispirited by Elon Musk's stuff, and so Twitter less so. I blog very occasionally on Aconventional with an A, not unconventional, Aconventional. But I'm most active at the moment on TikTok. I'm at Shackleton-Jones. I'm at Shackleton-Jones on most things, I think. So you can sort of track me down on different platforms. Not on MySpace. Um, so yeah, I'm not on Periscope. Is Periscope still going?
I'm not sure.
And I don't have a
Well,
podcast.
it's another experiment to go through again.
Yeah, yeah.
Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much
All
for
right.
coming onto the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Danny. Good to talk to you.